Hello and welcome to the 12 Days of Winter Wildlife. I'm Ros Wade, I'm the Learning Officer here at the Museum of Zoology, and I'm coming to you today live from the museum from our discovery space. This is where we have our British Bird Gallery, and as you can see behind me we've got some beautiful birds. On this side, we have birds that you might find in Cambridge's botanic garden, or even in your garden as well. But these are birds species that have been found in the botanic garden here in Cambridge. And we'll be having a special trip to the botanic garden with a virtual tour a little bit later in the live stream. And behind me on this side, we have birds found in one of our local wildlife hotspots, Wicken Fen. Really beautiful place to watch wildlife. But one of the things that we hope you'll be learning from the next 12 days is that you don't have to go very far to see some amazing winter wildlife. There is loads that you can enjoy right on your doorstep. So over the next 12 days, you can visit our blog, museumofzoologyblog.com, and you'll be able to find amazing animal facts. We've also got top wildlife tips on how to watch and support the wildlife in your own green spaces. And we have sustainable crafts and tips on how to have a more sustainable, a greener, festive season to support your local wildlife and wildlife further afield. But why the 12 days of winter wildlife? Well, it's inspired by that festive favourite, of course, the 12 Days of Critters. And no, that wasn't a slip of the tongue, because one of our PhD students here, the brilliant Kate Howlett, has rewritten the words of the 12 Days of Christmas to be the 12 Days of Critters, and feature some fantastic winter wildlife that you might be able to see, or animals that do some really interesting stuff over the winter months. And we'll be introducing you to those animals throughout the live stream today. Every blog post that we have coming up over the next 12 days on museumofzoologyblog.com is inspired by the animals in this song. As well as introducing those animals to you today, we have a live Q&A with a winter wildlife expert. We have Rob Jacques from the British Trust for Ornithology coming to join us in about 10 minutes or so. So if you have any questions, particularly about winter birds, please do pop them in the comments on YouTube and we will answer as many of those as we can. We have a virtual tour of the Botanic Garden. We are going to show you a really fun critter craft as well. And we have a special screening right at the end of the live stream. This is what you'll all be waiting for, so do stay tuned for this. A special screening of the world premiere of the recording of the 12 Days of Critters, sung by staff and volunteers from across the University of Cambridge museums. But before we get into any of that, we are going to start off by having a look at the first three of our critters from the song. So, staff and students and volunteers here in the museum have been making films telling some of the stories behind these amazing animals. So on the first day of critters, my true love sent to me a hedgehog in a leaf pile. On the second day, 2 garden birds. And on the third day, 3 winter moths.
Hedgehogs have a sheet of muscle over their backs that can pull their 5,000 spines down over their faces, legs and bellies, so that they are protected. Now, hedgehogs eat pretty much anything they like. They eat slugs and snails and worms and insects and frogs and small mammals and lizards and even dead animals. And what they do is, over the autumn in the colder parts of their range in Europe, they eat a lot of food, build up a good supply of fat, and then use that fat over the winter as insulation and as a supply of energy. And then they hibernate throughout the colder months and wake up every couple of weeks to top up a bit of food and also to go to the toilet.
Our garden birds have lots of different strategies for surviving winter. The robin, for example, will defend small territories, and that's why we hear robins singing so much this time of year. And the fact that both males and females defend territories is why both genders have the really bright classical red markings. Other species, however, survive winter by being more sociable. So, for example, the long-tailed tit will move around in family flocks, generally made up of parents and siblings, and they will together look for resources such as food. They will stay alert to predators, and they even roost together, with the most senior individuals in the family getting the warmest spot in the middle.
Winter moths are one of a few species of insect that can fly in temperatures close to freezing and can survive the coldest weather as an active adult. For most species of butterfly and moth, such as those you can see over my shoulder, they tend to survive the winter as larvae or pupae and find leaf litter to hunker down in and survive the worst of the weather. For those that do survive as adults, they still tend to find sheltered outhouses and remain dormant. But as always in nature, there are exceptions to the rule. The winter moth can shiver to raise its body temperature and is well insulated to retain any of the heat that it does produce. Other moths do also shiver, but the winter moth can use this and other adaptations to power its flight muscles when other insects can't.
So I do think it is absolutely amazing the moths can stay active over the winter. I find it hard to stay active on a cold day today, so that a moth can do it is just incredible. Check out our blog post on Thursday and you'll be able to find out more about those amazing winter moths. And also we've got a fantastic design for your very own moth decoration made out of recycled fabric that has been designed by one of our volunteers, Natasha Lavers. Now, if you like birds, you're in for a real treat today because we have Rob Jacques from the British Trust for Ornithology. He'll be here to answer your questions in about 10 minutes' time. So pop those questions in the comments on YouTube. But also you can check out our blog tomorrow because that's all about garden birds. We have a short film from Andrew Bladen about how to support birds in your green spaces. We've got beautiful recordings of winter birds by Dr. Tony Fulford as well that you can find on our blog, and you'll be able to learn how to make a seed cake to help feed those birds in your garden because they'll be getting quite hungry at this time of year. Now on today's blog post, you'll be able to find top tips from our staff, students and volunteers on watching and supporting wildlife in your green spaces and locally. But you'll also be able to find a really cute design by our learning assistant, Sarah Steele, for your very own hedgehog in a leaf pile. And here she is to tell you more about it.
Hello, my name is Sarah and I'm here in the Museum of Zoology British Bird Gallery. And today I'm going to show you how to make your very own pop-up hedgehog in a leaf pile. So, what you'll need is a hedgehog and a leaf pile template, which you can find on today's Museum of Zoology blog for the 12 days of winter wildlife. You'll also need some thick paper or card to put your hedgehog in a leaf pile in. You'll need some tissue paper in autumnal colours or any colours you like. You'll also need some colouring pencils, some scissors and a glue stick. And once you've got all of your bits and pieces together, I would start by colouring in your hedgehog and leaf pile. So let's get started.
So we'll come back to Sarah a little bit later in the live stream to see how to put your hedgehog in a leaf pile together, and it really is very cute when it's made. But now we're going to go and have a look at our next three winter critters. So on the fourth day of critters, my true love sent to me 4 compost creatures. On the 5th day of critters, my true love sent to me 5 ladybirds, and on the 6th day of critters, 6 foxes foraging.
The biologist D.O. Wilson described insects as little things that run the world, and that's because they're important for a whole range of different ecosystem processes and functions, everything that goes on in an ecosystem. But I think he could have been more general. I think he'd have applied that to all invertebrates, including this fantastic centipede behind us. If you look under leaf litter, if you look in the compost heap in your garden, it's going to be crawling with life, and a lot of it's this smaller stuff. It includes things which are predators, things which are herbivores, things which are pollinators, things which are important for decomposition. All of these different processes go through insects and other invertebrates. So I think they're important because they illustrate the sheer diversity of life that shares the planet with us, not just in terms of number of species, but also in terms of what those species do.
Ladybirds. In late autumn or early winter, as the temperature begins to drop, it's quite common to find groups of ladybirds huddled together. At this time of the year, their food sources such as aphids are dwindling and freezing temperatures pose a threat to them. So adult ladybirds seek out warm, sheltered locations to hunker down and see out the coldest part of the year.
The red fox can be found all across the Northern Hemisphere, in North America, parts of North Africa, Europe and Asia. They are highly adaptable and have found ways to live near human settlements, feeding on scraps and leftovers. As such, if you want to see a fox, you're more likely to see one in a town or city than in the countryside where they're more reclusive. They're described as crepuscular and nocturnal, which means they're active at dawn and dusk. But that doesn't mean you can't see one in the daytime. And even if you can't see one, you can still hear one. Male foxes, called dogs, make a loud barking noise, but female foxes, called vixens, make an eerie screeching cry, kind of like a banshee.
Some really beautiful winter wildlife there. Check out our blog on Friday the 4th of December and you can explore compost creatures in a bit more detail with Dr. Ed Turner, our curator of insects. Then on Saturday the 5th, we explore hibernation, so you can find out about animals that are a bit more dormant over the winter months and also learn how to make an insect refuge for your garden. And then on Sunday the 6th of December, it's the turn of our winter mammals. So we'll be getting under the skin of the red fox. We'll be finding out about grey squirrels. And you can see if your memory is as good as a squirrel's by playing our caching game as well. So make sure you don't lose those acorns. Now, our winter bird expert, Rob Jacques, will be with us very soon in about 5 minutes' time, so do keep those questions coming in the comments on YouTube. But to give you a little bit of inspiration, I was treated to an early morning visit to the beautiful Cambridge University Botanic Garden a few days ago, and here's some of the wildlife that we saw there. Hello, I'm here at Cambridge University Botanic Garden. It's a bit of a treat. I'm here before the visitors arrive on a pretty chilly late November morning. And we're going to have a look and see what wildlife we can find here. I'm also going to be joined by my colleague, Dr. Chantal Helm, who works here at the garden, who's going to be telling us a little bit about some of the wildlife that it supports.
Well, welcome to the Botanic Garden on a very cold and chilly morning. We have recorded over 2,933 wildlife species here in the garden over the years through our many BioBlitz and all the experts coming to the garden. So we are a wildlife haven, we like to think so, and we try and keep areas wild like this one, which will help to support the wildlife in the garden. But not only these wild areas, we've got a lake, and we've got open areas, we've got beds, we've got ponds, we've got a wide diversity of different habitats that can support all sorts of different species. This is a giant log pile. During the BioBlitz, some keen entomologists were sifting through here, pulling out an amazing diversity of invertebrates and detritivores and all sorts. So we've got quite a lot of badger activity in the Botanic Garden because we've got a large set around the lake, and in the summertime, if you come around sunset, you can actually see a number of them emerging. And this is a latrine, which is a sign of them. They like to deposit their very gooey earthworm-filled droppings at this time of year in these little holes. And oftentimes it's used to mark boundaries between different clans. And if you stick a stick in them, it's a bit hard, it was pretty cold this morning, and I like to do this with students, and just smell. It's got a very distinctive smell of badger, so you can tell it's a badger poo. This wildlife camera is set up on a wildlife path that's running along the edge there. And last year some students were studying the muntjac population, but they caught foxes, badgers, muntjac and all the rest strolling along this path. Badgers can be very faithful to their paths and often will form very distinct paths in the landscape.
Badgers aren't the only mammals to leave their mark in the Botanic Garden. Here are the footprints, or hoofprints, of a muntjac deer that's run through the beds.
This winter, some students are going to be looking at all of our trees in the garden. We've got 1,600 trees, and when you get some decay in the tree, and you get some holes like this one's got, and some crevices and broken branches, there's always potential for bats to be hibernating in there.
One mammal you're sure to see in the garden is a grey squirrel, scampering up tree trunks and performing acrobatics through the branches. They feed on seeds, nuts, pine cones, buds, and if you put out food for the birds, you may find they have a taste for that too. Squirrels are known for their caching behaviour, storing food in different places, usually underground, so that it is available to them throughout the winter. But they are not the only animals to do this. Here's a jay we spotted burying an acorn in the ground. Look carefully and you can see it bobbing up and down in the grass. And there it goes, flying away again. Jays are handsome birds with beautiful pale pink feathers, black and white tail, and a flash of blue on the wings. Speaking of colourful birds, here we have a female and rather extravagant male pheasant with his chestnut body and dark green head. Water is really important for supporting wildlife, and there is plenty in the Botanic Garden, from the formal fountain to the fen display showcasing our local wetland habitat, and of course the lake, complete with moorhens and mallards here. Like the pheasant, the male mallard, called a drake, has a striking green head, while the female is more camouflaged with speckled brown feathers. On land you can see the long bright green legs of the moorhen. A close look at their toes and you can see that they are not webbed like a duck's. Instead, they have long toes that help to spread out their weight and keep them from sinking when walking on aquatic plants and in marshes. Not such a problem on the Botanic Garden lawns. Heron feet are similar, and their long legs are perfect for wading through shallow water. Here they'll often stand still as a statue, waiting for a fish to swim by, then strike quickly, catching its prey with its long beak. But this heron was just having a stroll around the garden. A heron in flight is an impressive sight. With fewer leaves on the trees, we could spy some of the smaller birds in the garden. Here's a robin loudly declaring its territory. A moment of tranquility at the start of the day. And I'm joined live now by Rob Jacques from the BTO. Hello, Rob. I think your microphone's switched off. I don't know if you can...
Hi there, you should be able to hear me now.
Fantastic, thank you. It's okay. A few technical things, but we're all used to those now. But thank you, that's brilliant. Thank you so much for joining us today. We've been getting some questions coming in for you already, but I'm going to ask you a couple of mine first. One thing, I was really surprised by how many birds were singing. It was a couple of days ago that I was at the Botanic Garden and there were so many birds singing. I was really taken aback by it. I don't expect it in winter. What kind of thing can we expect to sort of see and hear at the moment?
For singing birds in winter, there's a handful of our species that prefer to do that. And these tend to be species that don't migrate away and they're holding territories over the winter ready for next spring. So robins, as you pointed out in the video, are a big one. They'll sing a lot, as are dunnocks, which are a similar size to robins, small grey bird. But it's a really good time to see them this time of year because they'll often be on top of hedges, singing loudly. Whereas the rest of the year, they can be a bit secretive, hiding underneath bushes and in thick vegetation. And also blackbirds, especially in the early evening, and song thrushes as well, which are quite distinctive songs. They repeat little verses 3 or 4 times and then move on to a new kind of song. Like to show off a bit that way.
Oh, fantastic. So, have I got this right? You work for the Garden BirdWatch scheme at the BTO. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
That is true. The Garden Birdwatch Scheme has been running for 25 years now. We ask our Garden Birdwatchers to submit their weekly bird counts. So across the country, around 20,000 people take part in the scheme. They watch what comes into their garden every week and let us know the maximum count of each species, include not only birds, but also mammals, reptiles, amphibians, butterflies, dragonflies, and a few other things.
Fantastic. So is this something that people in our audience would be able to get involved with then if they have a garden?
Yes, very easily, yes. It's a free scheme, so people can just join as and when they want. If you go to bto.org/gbw, people will be able to sign up there, find out loads of information on how to take part, more information on their garden birds. And it'd be great to have more people taking part, especially in Cambridge.
Brilliant. So are gardens like a really important habitat for birds?
So this is one of the things we're hoping to understand. We do think so. A lot of different birds will come into gardens and use them, for maybe only briefly, but that it's an important resource in the winter. So we've done studies which show that up to 60 different blackbirds can come into a garden during a single day. It's easy to think that it's maybe the same one that's repeatedly coming to your feeders, but in some gardens you'll be having these rotation of individuals coming through. So you could be supporting hundreds of birds during a day, and it may only look like you're supporting a small handful. And in the summer months, increasingly, if you've got a garden that's good for wildlife, it's got lots of vegetation, lots of places, you can have a lot of nesting birds in your garden. And they're often a nice corridor of green space in our urban environments as well, which can help a lot of animals move around between more wild areas without having to go onto roads and more urbanized areas.
Fantastic. So it's great to know that our gardens can be so important. Now I've got a number of questions coming in from people watching us today. So Ryan and Zoe Hubbard, I've got a couple of points from them. What are the best things to feed birds in the winter? When is the best time to cut a hedge so it doesn't interfere with the birds nesting but lets them overwinter and have the berries as well?
The best way to feed birds in the winter is to put a diverse mix of food. So you can, fortunately now we live in a really good time to buy lots of different kinds of bird food for gardens. It's a really big industry, which is another thing we want to understand a little bit more about. And as we've put more variety of food in our gardens, we've seen more species come into our gardens. So in the last 20 years, products like Niger seed and sunflower hearts, which weren't a commonly bought thing before, have allowed species like goldfinch and siskins to use our gardens more often. And these are great products to get if you want to attract those birds in. There's also suet pellets, which you can put on the floor. These are great for more insectivorous species like blackbirds, the other thrushes, robins. They really like the fats from there. One of the things maybe to avoid is big, cheap bags of mixed seed. Because what tends to happen is birds will come in, they come to the feeder, and they pick out all the seeds that they like and throw everything else to the ground, and it can make quite a horrible mess, and can get a little bit unhygienic at times. And you spend a lot of money on your bird food, and see a lot of it go to waste. So it's a lot more sensible for everyone if you get different feeders with different foods in them. Then the birds can get exactly what they want without them to pick through to get to their favourite bits.
Fantastic. I have to say that the sunflower seeds that I put out seem to go pretty quickly whenever I put any sunflower seed heart out.
Yeah, they seem to be popular with nearly everything.
Yeah. And do you have any advice on best times to cut hedges to avoid disturbing nesting birds?
Yes. So technically, if I'm remembering my mum's correctly, it isn't legal to do work on hedges without a proper ecological assessment between the months of March and October. And this is to prevent people from accidentally cutting down birds' nests. And we do get birds that will nest as late as October. Species like wood pigeons and coral doves can nest really late into the year. And other species like robins and blackbirds can nest very early. So the winter months are the best time. One of the other questions was to try and avoid berries and fruiting. So the peak for most of those is around September, October. That's when most of the berries are on the trees. So you'd be looking around this time of year. December probably the best time. You've not got much fruit left on the trees. And if so, you can also take those branches that you've cut off, which have the fruit, and put them to a side, and the birds will still come and visit it. And it should be before the majority of breeding. There's a few odd things that might do, and it's worth poking around to see if anything seems like it's breeding, but you're very unlikely at this time of year.
it's a good idea to get out soon and do that. Yeah, that sounds great. Yeah. So this is a question about feeding waterfowl, actually. Kate says, I've heard it's bad to feed waterfowl bread, particularly white bread. How bad is this for them, and what should we feed them instead?
There's been growing concern with feeding ducks bread in recent years, and there's quite a few areas that have tried to ban it now. In very small amounts, bread is fine for most ducks. The problem is that in urban parks, lots of people come into the parks, they really like to feed the ducks, and they can be given a constant chain of bread throughout the day. And quite like people, if we eat nothing but bread, it wouldn't be a very nutritionally balanced diet. There's lots of wild food normally in ponds for them to eat. But if you do want to feed them, it's normally best to go with some bird seed. So where the cheap bird mixed bird seed is actually better is for the ducks. They're less picky than a lot of the garden birds. And I believe grapes that have been cut in half are meant to be very popular with ducks as well. But it's worth remembering that unless it's frozen, as long as they've got access to water, there normally is a lot of plants on the surface that they're feeding on and small invertebrates.
So they don't really need it. It's more for our enjoyment than for them.
Yeah, but and that's absolutely fine. But if it's particularly snowy weather, if it's icy and they can't get access to that food, then putting out some extra seed and some grapes for them, and like bits of cabbage and lettuce and stuff like that, green leafy stuff.
So we've had a question, and this one's come up a few times when we've done things at the museum. Is there anything you can do to keep birds protected from prowling cats? So if you're feeding birds in your garden, is there any tips to sort of make sure that the cats don't get them?
One of the best things to do to avoid cats easily predating birds, if you've got bird feeders, keeping them far away from thick vegetation in a more open area. This means that the cats can't really quickly run in and grab a bird. They have a little bit more time then to make a getaway. And if you do happen to have a cat, one of the best things you can do is putting a bell on it. That's a really obvious way to stop it. Some cats seem to be able to learn how to move in such a way to stop the bell activating, but it's better than nothing. And keeping cats indoors around dusk and dawn, that's when they're most likely to be hunting. That and a few other things, yeah. So, but for actually protecting your birds, yeah, keeping your bird feeders away from the edges, nice and in the middle.
So Nicola McGovern is asking, how can we encourage woodpeckers to visit our garden more? We have had an exciting visit recently. It's exciting seeing a woodpecker in the garden.
Yeah, very excited. Yeah. So yeah, they're very dramatic looking bird on the bird feeder. They don't look like anything else. Much bigger than any of the birds you'll find hanging on the feeder, and bright black and white. I'm assuming they're talking about great spotted woodpecker. There's a few species in the UK. Great spotted woodpecker is the most common and the one you're most likely to see in gardens. However, you do also get green woodpecker, which is a bigger bird that has, the name would suggest, green, but you'll often find them on lawns, and they like to feed on insects and won't visit feeders as much. And there's a much rarer, lesser spotted woodpecker, which you'll only see in your garden if you live in a few places, such as Norfolk, Suffolk border. There's a few populations there, but very rare visits to the garden feeders now. As for attracting them into the garden, on your feeders, they like peanuts. That seems to be a preferred thing. So a feeder, a wire mesh feeder with some peanuts inside so they can get easy access to it and peck away at the sides. That's probably going to be the best way to attract woodpeckers. And they'll also come visit suet and flat blocks as well. And also how you might want to plant some more trees in your garden if you really like them. Trees that will grow up tall and quickly, things like birches are really popular with woodpeckers.
Oh, fantastic. Great tips there. And she's asked another question. How good are owls at hearing, and how can we encourage one into our owl box? It sounds like you've got a great garden there, Nicola.
That does sound like a very good garden. Having the owl box is a great start. That could attract them in. They've got exceptionally good hearing. That's one of the main ways that they hunt, but they also have very good eyesight. Their ears on the side of the head are at slightly different heights. This means that they can actually pinpoint where things are a lot easier. It's hard to describe right off the top of my head, but if their ears were the same height, they wouldn't be able to quite work out as accurately where prey was. But because they're slightly misaligned, the sound arrives to them in a different order, and they can work out much more precisely where a small mouse is. If you're hoping to attract them in, making sure there's prey available for them. So for this, you want to be looking at mice, shrews, voles, and the best way to attract these is to have more wild garden, places with some long grass, some log piles that gives them some habitat, maybe some piles of sticks and branches. That's a little bit more habitat for them. And they also a really big fan of frogs. During the spring months when frogs are most active, that's one of the main preys for a lot of tawny owls. If you have a pond, which is a great thing for a wildlife garden, especially one without fish, because unfortunately they like to eat the frogs, and particularly the frog spawn. But by attracting the frogs, the owls will probably come and have a couple of those as well.
Yeah.
Did I forget anything there?
Yeah. There's loads of top tips there. So Sam Bigwood is asking, what is the most unusual bird you've ever seen in Britain? Oh, got 3 questions. What's the most unusual bird you've ever seen in Britain? What is your favourite bird? What bird will you most likely see in the winter? So I guess that's what's the most common bird to be seen in the winter.
Oh, okay. There's some good questions there. The rarest bird I've seen. I've been go up to the coast now. I'm in Norfolk, and we've got lots of great places around here to go and see birds, and particularly rare birds that show up in the autumn and migration periods. You get odd things that show up from all across the world, and finding the rarest is very difficult. So the rarest thing, maybe a Baikal teal, which is an unusual duck that lives normally in Far East Asia, in the Baikal Lakes. And one of those showed up on the east coast of Yorkshire a few years ago. But there's also some very rare breeders in the UK. We've got sow buntings down on the south coast. There's only a small area where you can find those, and I've been down to visit. And they're a very rare bird and a very pretty small bird. Similar to a yellowhammer, but not quite as colourful. And if you happen to live in those areas, that might be a rare bird you could even see in your garden. You might have to remind me of what the second question was on the list.
The second was, what's your favourite bird? Which is the kind of question I find the hardest to answer. Your favourite bird.
I do have an answer.
Oh, you do have
I'm going
an
to go
answer.
with the cuckoo. Yes, the cuckoo. Because they are very interesting birds. As many people know, they lay their eggs in other birds' nests. And because they've evolved with so many different species that they want to practice this behavior with, they've got all these different habitats, and they've got all this interesting genetic stuff going on with them, which allows them to carry up this behavior. And it's always fantastic. You get to see a baby cuckoo that's come out of the nest still being fed by its host parents. And there's pictures on the internet where you can see of huge cuckoos with a little wren on their back trying to give them food because they think it's their enormous son. Yeah, so that's my answer, cuckoos.
And then the last question from Sam was, what bird will you most likely see in the winter? So what's the bird that you're most likely to see?
In our gardens, we do see very similar birds to what we see in the rest of the year. There may be different populations. So with birds like blue tits and blackbirds, you'll probably be seeing those all year round, but you may see more of them in the autumn and then in the winter. What you're only likely to see in the winter are the thrushes that visit from overseas. So with the fieldfare, which is a really big thrush that's got a grey back and is quite an impressive thing, and the redwing, which looks very similar to our song thrush but has a black eye stripe and some red in its armpits, which you can see when it's flying around. And these arrive in the autumn and spend the winter here, and they will come into gardens. If you live in the countryside, you'll probably see them quite often. If you're in the city, it'll be when there's really heavy snow, which means they can't get to food in the countryside, so they like to come into the urban areas. And this is a great time to look for unusual stuff in gardens. Not just the thrushes, but also some wading birds, like woodcocks will sometimes show up in gardens during the winter. And a bunch of other things that I'm forgetting right now.
Oh, so winter is quite an interesting time for bird watching then.
Yes, particularly if we get a snowstorm. That's a great time to be putting food out because that's when birds really need it. During long periods of cold weather, we see numbers of birds go down quite dramatically, which is what happened in 2018 with the beast from the east. Lots of our smaller birds like long-tailed tits, wrens and goldcrests, their numbers crashed because they're not able to keep warm and they have to be constantly feeding to stay warm during these cold months. And if they don't get that food, they unfortunately die. We are seeing that it normally only takes a couple of years for their numbers to bounce back up. It's a normal cycle for a lot of birds to have these really harsh winters and their numbers plummet, but within a couple of years they normally bounce back.
Okay.
But it's a great time to be looking out for birds because more unusual things will start up in your garden looking for food. So especially if you've got a pond, if you've got some water supply, if you've got some maybe fallen fruit like apples, and then scatter seeds and make sure your feeders are full, and that's when you'll be seeing lots of different birds in your garden.
Fantastic. So I've got another question here from Felicity McDonald-Smith. Our garden birds have somewhat lost interest in the fat balls on the feeder, although they are still eating seeds and mealworms. They love them all summer, and I'm still using the same brand. Okay, that was more of a comment, but yes. So there seems to be. Do birds tend to sort of occasionally go off certain foods when you give them that?
I think so. A lot of what birds will visit feeders for is because they're missing something else in their wild diet. If birds can avoid it, they don't want to really be too close to people because we pose a risk, as do like the cats and the dogs that live with us. So they will only come into gardens really when they feel like they need to. I suspect that if it was blue tits and stuff visiting fat balls in the summer months, this really helps them find extra food for themselves and gives them extra food while they have young birds. Which they won't give seeds to their chicks unless they were incredibly desperate. But we'll find that fat ball usage really goes up. Maybe at these times when blue tits are looking for this food for themselves, while they're busy looking also for wild food for their chicks. And as we've maybe got into the winter months, they need that a little bit less. They maybe switch over to other kinds of food that will give them different kinds of fats that will help them last the winter a bit better. But it gets into a very complicated level of understanding what the actual nutrition that birds need. But it's, I think that one of these things that we'd like to understand a little bit more. But likely what's happening, and also making sure the food is fresh as well. If you are putting fat balls out and they've been there for a couple of weeks and they're not being used, it's probably best to take them down because they do go off and it's not always great for birds. And they do pick up diseases from old food. Yeah,
because you have to clean your feeders, don't you, as well, to make sure that you don't pass on disease.
Yeah, this is one of the big things that we really push for at the moment is regularly cleaning feeders and getting rid of old food. We should be cleaning bird feeders at least once a week and only putting in enough food maybe to last a day at a time. There is a disease called trichomoniasis, which has been affecting several species, most notably the greenfinch, which was once one of our most common garden birds. And now has become quite unusual. Not many people see them anymore. And it's likely one of the big factors of this is this disease called trichomoniasis, which they pick up from bird feeders because bird feeders are a natural thing. The birds normally don't congregate in these tiny areas, landing on the same perch repeatedly. And it's a great way for diseases to spread. So if you see a sign of disease, if you see an unwell bird, best to take down the feeders for a couple of weeks. Even if you're not seeing unwell birds, regularly be cleaning them, change the food out, because there's also other things that can grow, different fungus that can grow on old food, and that's not really good for the birds either.
Okay, some really good tips there. I thought we'd just finish off and see if you've got any top tips for watching birds. Have you got any sort of ways that you can really sort of watch birds and get to see something that's a bit unusual?
If we're talking about in gardens, the best thing is, as I mentioned before, there's these times of year when you're more likely to see certain things. There'll be different birds passing through in the autumn and the spring. So making sure that's when you've got feeders, that's a great way to see them. Make sure there's lots of habitat and places for birds to hide, because if you have a very bare garden, birds won't want to spend very much time in it. You're less likely to see something unusual. Okay, here's a good tip. Okay, if you're living in an urban area and you're going past rowan trees or fruiting trees that have got small red berries, keep an eye out for waxwings, which are a thrush-sized bird which comes from Scandinavia. They breed in Sweden and Norway and Finland, but they come down to us in the wintertime, particularly during hard winters over there. Big numbers will arrive here, and you can often find them in car parks where people like to plant rowan trees, and you can get these very large flocks of these very attractive birds, which are like a pinky peach colour with a nice crest and some yellow and red markings on the wing, which how they get their name waxwing, because it looks like they've been dipped in wax. And that's a good bird to look out for in the winter months, especially in urban areas.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your time. That's been really, really fascinating. And I do encourage people to join the BTO Garden Birdwatch scheme and help add data to that as well. So thank you so much.
Not a problem. It's been very fun.
Okay. So now, feeling inspired by winter birds, we're going to move on to the next 3 critters from our song. So on the 7th day of critters, my true love sent to me 7 redwings feeding. On the 8th day, 8 worms are wriggling, which makes some nice food, particularly if you're a bird. And on the 9th, 9 geese migrating.
The relatively mild climate of the UK makes it quite a good resting stop for migrating birds. The redwing, that is seen here, migrate to the UK over winter from their northern breeding territories in Scandinavia and Iceland. The migration flight from the Scandinavian coast is over 800 kilometres across the North Sea with no stop. That's a long flight. Now, 8.6 million of these birds live in the UK during winter, and they'll all go back to their breeding territories in the spring. There have been a few pairs that have been recorded to breed in Scotland, probably because they don't want to make that long migration flight back.
The earthworm, like this one here, can often be overlooked, especially as it spends most of its life under the soil. But it actually plays an essential role in the environment and has a big impact on the world above ground too. The worm's subterranean lifestyle can make it a gardener's best friend. As they move through the soil, they help to churn it up, introducing airflow, recycling the nutrients and enriching the soil by breaking down plant matter. They can also become food for other animals, such as birds, toads, beetles, badgers, and hedgehogs. You can help the worms in your green space by creating compost heaps and reducing hard surfacing like paving where possible. We have 29 different species of worms in the UK, and every little bit we do can enable the worm to enrich the world around us.
There are 9 different species of goose that we can see here in the UK. 6 of these migrate here over the winter months to avoid the harsh cold weather further north, in places like Greenland, Siberia and Svalbard. The 6 species that migrate here are the tiger bean goose and the tundra bean goose, the pink-footed goose and the white-fronted goose, the barnacle goose and the Brent goose, which is our smallest native goose species. This specimen here is a greylag goose, which we can see all year round here. This is our commonest native goose species, and it has pink legs and an orange bill. So if you get to go out to a nature reserve over the winter months, keep your eyes peeled and see if you can spot any of our winter migrating goose residents.
So visit the blog on Monday the 7th of December to find out more fascinating information about our winter visitors. On Tuesday the 8th, we explore healthy habitats and find out more about those amazing earthworms. And on Wednesday the 9th of December, our blog post is all about winter water. So those things that you can put in your garden to help support more wildlife, but also we'll be looking at the birds that live around the water. But now we're going to go back to our hedgehog in a leaf pile. So we left Sarah earlier decorating her hedgehog in a leaf pile. Now she's going to show us how to create the card itself.
Once you've decorated your hedgehog and leaf pile, cut everything out and then fold everything, including your piece of card, down the middle. Make sure that your leaf pile is folded in the opposite direction to your hedgehog pieces. Then use the tabs to glue them down, and there you have it, a hedgehog in a leaf pile.
So you can find all the templates and also you can watch that video again on our blog post today. So if you go to museumofzoology.blog.com and click on the picture of the robin at the top, you'll be able to find all the templates and everything you need to make our hedgehog in a leaf pile. So we're now at the last of our winter critters. So on the 10th day of critters, my true love sent to me 10 deer a trekking. On the 11th day, 11 snow fleas jumping, and on the 12th day, 12 starlings flocking.
The
red deer, seen behind me, is one of the largest living deer species in the world. During wintertime, they grow thick coats of fur to protect them from the wintry cold. Male red deer, which are also called stags, may also develop thick manes of fur around their necks. Before summer, the red deer shed their winter coats by rubbing up against rocks and other hard objects, kind of like a giant back scratch.
Snow fleas aren't actually fleas, they're actually a type of scorpion fly, although they don't actually have wings. But like fleas, they can jump up to 5 centimetres. You usually find them in sandy soil or peatland areas. But if you want to look for them yourself, you can look in mossy areas. They're usually active around the most cold winter months, but although they're called snow fleas, they're around all year.
The glossy iridescence of a starling on a sunny day is a beautiful thing to witness on your garden bird feeders. And actually, this is one of the best times of year to witness one of the UK's most amazing natural wonders, a starling murmuration. If you happen to be in the right place, then just before dusk you may witness hundreds to tens of thousands of starlings gathering above a communal roosting site. And there they'll form a perfectly coordinated, twisted cloud that dances across the fading sky. Now, whilst this is mesmerising to us, these huge flocks may actually help to confuse any predatory birds that are in the area. We actually have more starlings in the UK in the winter than at any other time of year. Resident bird numbers are boosted by Northern European populations moving in. But don't resent them eating all the food and massing on your bird feeders. Across the continent, their numbers are actually in decline.
So visit the blog on Thursday the 10th of December and discover about all the traces of winter wildlife. So you may not have seen the animal, but they will leave behind some evidence, from footprints to poo to owl pellets. You can find out all about that fantastic stuff. And also be inspired to make your own potato printed wrapping paper to sustainably wrap your winter gifts. Then on Friday the 11th of December, we explore surprising winter animals. So those animals that you don't really expect to be able to cope with the cold in the way that they do. And you can also learn how to upcycle an old t-shirt to make a crocheted snowflake decoration. So that's quite surprising, a change as well in use. And then on Saturday the 12th, it will be our final blog post of the 12 Days of Winter Wildlife, and we will be celebrating all the 12 critters that are in the song, and you'll be able to make an origami starling murmuration decoration as well. So now we're going to what you've all been waiting for all the way through this live stream. Thank you very much for staying with us all this time. We are going to show you now the world premiere of the 12 Days of Critters. You can sing along. You can either download the lyric sheet from today's blog post, or you can follow the words on the screen as we sing along with the staff and volunteers of the University of Cambridge Museums as they sing the 12 Days of Critters.
On the first day of critters, my true love said to me, a hedgehog in the leaf pile. On the second day of critters, my true love said to me, two garden birds and a hedgehog in the leaf pile. On the third day of critters, my true love said to me, three winter moths, two garden birds and a hedgehog in the leaf pile. On the fourth day of critters, my true love said to me, four helpless creatures, three winter moths, two garden birds and a hedgehog in the leaf pile. On the fifth day of critters, my true love said to me, five ladybirds, four helpless creatures, three winter moths, two garden birds and a hedgehog in the leaf pile. On the sixth day of critters, my true love said to me, my true love sent to me. 11 snowflakes jumping, 10 deer drinking, 9 migrating, 8 wasps are wriggling, 7 ravens feeding, 6 foxes foraging, 5 ladybirds, 4 corpus creatures, 3 winter moths, 2 garden birds, and a hedgehog in a leaf pile. On the 12th day of Christmas, my true love sent to me 12 starlings flocking, 11 snowflakes jumping, 10 deer trekking, 9 geese migrating, 8 worms are wriggling, 7 ravens feeding, 6 foxes foraging, 5 ladybirds, 4 corpus creatures, 3 winter moths, 2 garden birds, and a hedgehog in a leaf pile.
So thank you for joining us today on this exploration of winter wildlife. I hope you enjoyed it. Do check out today's blog. Click on the robin at the top of Museum of Zoology blog.com and you can find top wildlife tips from staff, students and volunteers at the museum, as well as templates, and you can download our winter wildlife spotter sheet and get spotting that wildlife that's coming to your local green space. And remember to come back over the next 12 days as we have so many activities and loads of information. It's a really great time to come and have a look at our blog and get to see some of the stuff that's on there. Send us any pictures that you have of any of the winter wildlife that you spot or any of your creations as well. If you just tag us on social media, you could feature in our online community gallery on the blog as well. So that's all from me today. All that's left for me to say is goodbye and Merry Critters.